Hey guys, what's up? This is Flawkes, and today I'm going to be going over team compositions. Now this is very basic. I just want to cover like the fundamentals and give you give you very generic pointers and tips on like possible teams you can come up with or what you can build. I want to address this issue because it is like the #1 most asked question on any medium that you look at. If there's like a forum or like a Reddit post or like Facebook or like whatever else there is on YouTube, most of the time the #1 asked question is, can you help me build my team? Or can you help me build a team for X? Can you help me build it for PvE, PvP, World Boss, Ancient Dungeon, whatever. So I kind of want to give you guys a couple pointers to help you think for yourself and decide what you can build and what you can't build yet because you don't have the right units. Obviously, I can't tell you exactly what you should build because everybody's going to have a different set of units. Not all of us start with the same units except for Leon. Everybody starts with Leon. So I want to keep it generic for that reason. So first of all, I want to cover the types of teams, or like types of team compositions. So the most common one is going to be the all-rounder. Let me just switch to tome. Actually, you know what? Let me just, switch to tome. So for all-rounders, we're talking about parties of 3, so usually you're going to have some sort of frontliner or like a melee character. We're looking at warriors and paladins mostly. They tend not to do too much damage. That might not be the case, obviously, with all units, because if you check here, you'll see like Monte Cristo hits like a dump truck. He has 600 plus attack power, but he's lacking more on HP side and a little less armor and resistance than other warriors. It's a give or take thing. Whereas Leon is more of an all-rounder. He has decent attack power still, less than Monte Cristo by about 100, but more HP, more armor, more etc. And then people who are just like pure tank, right? So that's your frontliner. And then in the middle, you'll have a healer of some sort, or like support. In this case, it will just have to be a healer because the only support unit I can really think of is Wumpa. Wumpa is great up until like hard mode or like higher end PvP. He doesn't heal as much, but I digress. So in the middle, you have your healer. This is your sustain. So this allows you to stay in battle for longer. This allows you to keep your units healthy. It essentially extends the lifespan of your units. Mostly, it's going to be your frontliner because your frontliner is going to be taking the bulk of it. Most attacks. Most attacks, besides certain archer and certain mage attacks, they will only ever hit the first unit that it touches. That your attack touches. Most of the time, that's going to be the first unit in the front. So that's going to be your melee. So your warrior or your paladin is probably going to take the brunt of the attacks. So that's why healers are important, because you got to keep them alive, because otherwise you just get run over. So that's usually your second unit, and then your third unit is usually your ranged DPS. This is going to be your archer, your gunner, your hunter. I keep saying gunner, or your wizard or mage, whatever. These 3 classes tend to do much more damage than the first. Actually, just all the other classes in general. Priests obviously don't do much damage, but like your warriors and paladins, they tend to do a little less, and this is like the power. This is where the power comes from your team most of the time. So you're gonna be looking at an archer who can pierce through all enemies, or a gunner that just does a lot of DPS to the front unit, or mages who do AOE, but on the spot. It depends. So every unit's different. You honestly should just look at what units you have. Look at their 6-star form or the final form, and then just click on their skill, and then take a look at their passive, because passives are what set these units apart. This is what makes them unique besides just stats. Obviously, passives are like extra effects to your character, and that's a big part of team composition. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I guess that's like I wandered off topic. This is your well-rounded team. So once again, this is like you need a frontliner. So you're looking at a warrior, paladin, some sort of healer. So a good priest or just a priest will just fill the spot, and then your ranged DPS. So like an archer, hunter, or mage. Other team compositions that will work, depending on the situation and what you need, are a tank-heavy team. So you might have a warrior and a paladin, or two warriors, or two paladins, and then one etc. The etc. could be a priest, or it could be one of the DPS classes. This does work, especially in arena, because the battles are so short. You don't have to worry about sustaining or like keeping your units healthy by healing them. This won't really work as well for quests, but for everything else, it should be okay. Sorry, quest and world boss, because world boss does quite a bit of damage, and battles generally don't end that fast. Or if they do, you don't even need help from me. They're too good. But that's another team composition, just the tank heavy side. Another one would be sustained, like heavy sustained. So we're talking about like a dedicated tank. I'm talking about like very specific warrior units, very specific paladin units. Ones I'm talking about might be like Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc's passive soaks up damage of the entire team. So she obviously has a very low attack stat, so you know that her role is a tank. Leon can play this role. I'm relating to Leon because all of us have Leon, and Leon is a very good unit, honestly, a very good starting unit. He does a good amount of DPS for physical damage, and he also has pretty tanky stats. He has a lot of armor, and a decent amount of resistance, and high HP, so he can be your frontliner. And then for the rest of the sustain, you can even have like two healers, depending on how tanky your frontliner is, or you can have you can probably throw in a DPS. Honestly, it's very similar to an all-rounder. I think it's like a specific subset of an all-round team. The sustain, it's when you guarantee when your front line is just defined as a tank. They do nothing but tank everything. Paladins are generally very good for this. A lot of paladins deal with stuns, so crowd control. So they stun the enemy, or actually that's about it. Yeah, they stun the enemy, or they soak up damage for the whole team. So yeah. Another team that's a little more rare. You probably won't have this team at the very beginning of the game when you start, because you don't have as many units. Is I guess a DPS team or a speed team. I'm not really sure how you would really want to call it. This is when you run 3 DPS classes or 3 DPS characters. So say you have a warrior, like I guess Leon kind of qualifies. Leon is split between like a DPS and a tank. He does a little bit of both. He's not bad at either, really, honestly. So that's why he's pretty good of a unit. But like if you have like Monte Cristo, although I've never actually seen anyone use Monte Cristo because he's a little too fragile. But Kane's a good example. Kane's like Abel. Oh, what am I talking about? Abel. He's like a little in between. But then you mostly just you'll most likely just be looking at 3 units made up of just archer, hunter, and mages, because they do the most amount of damage in the game in the shortest amount of time. So teams like these are usually used for scenarios where you need to burst someone down, or you need to clear it as quickly as possible. I can actually give you an example. This is the best use for most ancient dungeon quests or stages, especially the legendary hero ones. So I'm talking about like stages with like Dorothy, D'Artagnan, Leon. I can't pronounce the paladin legendary Kremhild of Oath, whatever. And then there's like the archer legendary, priest legendary, whatever. So dungeons like that, you'll want to finish as quickly as possible. That's one very efficient way of repeating that quest or beating that quest. Is to just blast through it. And this also works for PvP. Actually, it's very common in PvP, where sometimes you'll often see like 3 hunters, or a mix of archer, gunner, and mage, because they do so much damage that you don't have to worry about soaking damage yourself, and you don't have to worry about healing. You just steamroll the other guy. That totally works. But like I said in the beginning, it's probably not going to work out for you. You probably don't have the right units or enough power to pull that off. And more importantly, actually, you're not going to do that well in quests, because for PvE, there's a lot of monsters and only 3 units for yourself, right? So no matter what, you're probably gonna take a couple hits, and after like 5-6 waves, maybe 1 or 2 units of yours will die. So that's why it's recommended to have sustain for PvE. It just makes it easier. But for almost everything else, you can probably get by with just DPS team. But like I said, this is hard. You have to know what you're doing. You have to have the right setup and the right units. I'll talk a little bit more of that next, actually, regarding like synergy and etc. So besides all these team compositions, what else is there to think about? What is there to consider? Most people may not consider factors like damage type. This is actually a pretty important part of building your team. So there's 2 types of damage in this game. There's physical and there's magical. If you look at a unit, say we'll just go in and look at Alex or Alexander. If you click on his skill, or his special skill if he had one, you'll see what kind of damage they do. So Ground Crush, his regular his block skill, it does physical damage. So there you go. Now you know what damage he does. If you look at someone like a mage, for instance, let's look at Dorothy. His block, her block skill does magic damage. You'll see in the text, magic damage. Why this is important is because if you look at every single character, let's look at Warriors first, because Warriors and Paladins are really obvious. In the stats, you'll see armor and resistance. The difference between those two is physical and magic resist, essentially. Armor is essentially physical damage resistance. How much less damage this unit will take from physical damage. Resistance, on the other hand, if we look at Paladins generally have much higher resistance than armor, opposite of Warriors. So Paladins are going to take much less magic damage from opponents than they will physical, because they have lower armor, because magic is reduced by resistance. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Most of the time, you'll generally want to cover both bases. You'll generally want a source of physical and a source of magic damage. This is because, especially in PvE, most bosses have a shield that alternates between the two. So they'll have a shield that, for maybe like, I don't know, a couple seconds, they'll have high physical resistance or high armor, and all of a sudden they'll switch over to magic, so they'll have high resistance. So that's why it's important for you to bring 2 types of damage. There's also a 3rd type of damage, actually. That's actually neutral damage. A very easy easy way to demonstrate this is actually through Bella. Bella is one of the goddesses that you recruit. She's the last one, so you have to beat the last stage first. She does neutral damage, and neutral damage, as it says right here, actually, it says ignores enemies' armor and resistance. So you can think of neutral damage as like true damage. If you play other games, or pure damage, I'm not sure what games uses pure damage, but it's all the same thing. It's basically just damage that will not be reduced in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. So why this is important, again, outside of PvE though, it's important because of specific units. So every unit has high resistance or high armor, or a mix of the two. Warriors have high armor in general. Paladins have high resistance in general. Archers, from what I recall, yeah, they're about the same. So they're like, they're not really weak against either, but they're generally kind of squishy. Same with hunters and mages. Hunters, I think, hunters have a little more armor, whereas mages have more magic resist. And priests, I think, are split as well. Yeah, so priests and archers are, they're all round, I guess, but they technically still are very squishy, whereas hunters are more armor heavy and mages are more resistant heavy. These all matter when you look at PvP, because if you look, say, for example, if you go to PvP right now, and if you look at an enemy team, I guess I'll have to use a ticket. So if you look at this team, for instance, you'll see right here, the frontliner is a Leon. So that's physical damage resistance, because he has a lot of armor. And then in the middle, you have an archer. Archers are a split of both, generally very squishy, but they don't take extra damage, or they don't take reduced damage for either one, like in particular. And then at the very end, you have Sasquatch, which is a mage, so he is going to have high resistance. If you bring mixed damage, you're gonna do decent against both, but if you say only have physical attack, you're going to have trouble taking down Leon, but you'll have an easy time taking the rest of the team. Whereas if you're magic heavy, you'll just blast through Leon like nothing, and then you'll have a slightly harder time with Sasquatch, but honestly, backlines are generally weaker, so it should be okay. And that's a different case if, say, the frontliner was a paladin. I don't have that example right now, but if the frontliner was a paladin, then you might want to lean towards physical damage just to get through like the front line, so you can start hitting, the priest and the ranged DPS at the back. So that's why damage difference is important, or to cover both physical and magic damage. But there's strategy behind that. And this brings me to my next point, synergy and roles, I guess. So let's see, probably a pretty easy example, actually might be, an easy example would be Hanzo, I guess. Just one of very many debuffers in the game. What I mean by debuffs is it weakens the enemy with a status. So if you look at his passive, his enemies hit by Silver Moon Flying Sword will have their defense decreased by 2% of the max of the hero's max health for 5 seconds, and etc, etc, etc. This lowers their defense. So units like Hanzo will make the magic and physical damage, the physical or magic damage resistance less important, because he just kind of in general reduces everyone's defense. So you can worry less about it. In all honesty, you can probably just build, if you really want it, you can build just one type of damage and throw in a Hanzo in your team and probably be okay. You'll do better than if you didn't have Hanzo, for instance, because say you're all physical and then you came across a team that was just 3 warriors. You're gonna have a tough time cracking that, right? Or you can look at units like Leon. Leon's passive specifically ignores armor. So Leon, ironically, is good against Leons. So Leon versus Leon is going to be the matchup that you might be looking at. So his attacks are just going to shred the other person's armor. I mean, this is an example of where synergy might come in. Unfortunately, his passive doesn't actually apply to the rest of the team. So if you have 2 other physical attackers behind Leon, Leon's passive will only affect Leon's attack. So yeah, there's that. But there are debuffers in this game, and that's why I really highly encourage you to look at your tome and tomb. And tome. I pronounce this wrong all the time. And just check out your unit. Figure out what they do, and if they do magic or physical damage, or what their passive does. Do they reduce like the enemy's magic resistance? Do they reduce the enemy party's armor, like armor shred or magic shred, whatever. Like, this is all very important for you to consider when you're building your team. So say if you want to pull off a magic only team. The problem is if you run into paladins or if you run into like mages, then they take less damage from that, and the point is just to blast through them. So if you keep that in mind, then if you have a debuffer, someone that reduces resistance, then you can make that team work. You don't even have to care what the other enemy team is if you have a team composition that revolves around reducing the enemy's resistance and dealing a lot of magic damage yourself. And these are all just examples of what you can do. Like I said, I want to be very generic with these, because I don't want to get into like any specific units, because I don't know what you guys have, right? We all have different units, so yeah. Besides that, I guess this is getting a little long. It's been like 18 minutes. One more thing I want to go over is kind of like roles. I kind of went over this already, but I just kind of want to wrap up with this. Every unit has a specific role that they have. So in general, not always, but in general, warriors and paladins will do less damage, but they'll have higher HP, and they'll have either high armor or high resistance. You can kind of call them as not only frontline, but more specifically like tanks. So they'll soak up more damage. If you need, like, say you're doing a quest and you realize that you're dying too quick, your units are dying too quickly. This usually means you probably don't have a good enough frontline or a good enough tank, right? So there's that. But you don't want to build a party that has 3 tanks, because you don't have enough damage. So that's also something worth considering, and you should probably figure out like the roles of every unit that you have, right? Priests have a very simple, I guess, role set. They're pretty much just there for sustain. They're not going to be there for your tank most of the time, but they do have roles that are a little more subtle. So if you look at, say, Wumpa is not what I would say the high-end priest, but he has his uses. Specifically, if you look at his passive, he actually provides buffs for the team. So he is he's more of a buffer than he is a healer, because his heals aren't actually that strong. If you look at his scaling, he actually doesn't scale with his third chain. His 1 chain and 2 chain is 35 and 80%, but his third chain is also 80%. So not that great. If you want to be defensive, you actually have to focus on 2 chains for most, if you actually want to heal and protect your team the most. Because if you look at his passive, if you use a 2 chain or chain 2, he buffs your party with increased armor and resistance. So, someone like that you would call a buffer. That's why Wumpa is not that great later on in the game, because he's usually replaced by a dedicated healer. Healers being actually just about everyone else, like Nurse Speed or Nurse Spy. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce it. She has an AoE heal, and you can tell that she's more dedicated to healing than Wumpa, because she doesn't necessarily give a buff to anyone. She actually reduces the enemies, so she's actually a debuffer. But I wouldn't say that's a strong point. Someone like Mew has a more subtle role. She actually generates blocks for you, so that's also a role. I'm actually going to cover that in the next video about synergy. But you should figure out like what your units do, and that should more or less tell you what kinds of teams you can build and what teams will work for whatever you need. So like I said before, Ancient Dungeon, sometimes you're going to want to blast through it to be more efficient, because these dungeons are generally much shorter. So you can probably get away with bringing like 3 archers or 3 gunners or 3 mages or some mix of that, right? And usually same with PvP. But for like questing and for world boss, you probably want some sort of sustain. So maybe a tank, maybe a priest to go with it, or if you can get by with 2 tanks, that works, or 2 priests, that works. There's a lot of possibilities, and that's why you're gonna get a different answer from different people when you ask, what team can I build with these units? And honestly, I really hope you guys will just try and think for yourself and try and figure out what units or what teams you can build yourself and what teams to try out. Because honestly, you can try it. This game's very forgiving. You regenerate 1 meat every 10 minutes. That's not so bad. And you have like PvP to try it out. You have keys for Ancient Dungeon. You have so many resources, so you can just play around. But the most important part is when you try and figure this stuff out and you learn from it, that's when you get better at the game. That's when you understand more about the game. And that's why I strongly encourage you guys to try out your own teams. Try and figure it out yourself. But obviously I'm not saying don't ask people, because advice is always nice. But yeah, I'll probably put out one more video. I don't want to make promises though, because I'm not sure, but I'll make another video after this, because I realize this is running a little long. I'll talk a little bit more about synergy and examples and probably common team builds. So you guys can tune in for that. Sorry for making this video so long, but I hope you guys learned something, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.